Welcome to another episode of Remember the Great Sports NBA 2K18 roster edits. Today we're going to do the St. Louis/Atlanta Hawks all-time team. If you're a younger viewer, you may not realize that the Atlanta Hawks used to be the St. Louis Hawks, and before that actually played in Milwaukee. But you have to go really far back to know that knowledge. And there's a few players that I feel needed to be added to this all-time Hawks roster that necessarily weren't Atlanta Hawks, but they were St. Louis Hawks. So I'm going to go through the stock roster on the game. That's what we're looking at right here. And the first name that you see is Bob Pettit. Bob Pettit was the best St. Louis Hawks player ever to play. He was a scoring power forward out of LSU and set many records at the time of his playing days playing for the St. Louis Hawks. Obviously, Dominique Wilkins, one of the greatest showman offensive players the game has ever seen. Never had a chance to win a ring, but he was one of my favorite players growing up. You know, I still love watching his highlights to this day. If you get a chance, definitely YouTube Dominique Wilkins and watch some of his dunks. It is just amazing what that man could do on an NBA court. You have your center, Dikembe Mutombo. One could argue that some of Mutombo's best years were with the Hawks for the 4.5 years that he was there. You can see, obviously, you know that he played for the Nuggets as well, but the Hawks have retired his number. He's also in the NBA Hall of Fame, so I feel that he was probably the best center for the Hawks, although they have other Hall of Fame centers, and we'll talk about them a little bit in this video. At small forward, you have Lou Hudson. I actually adjust his small forward status to actually be a shooting guard because him and Wilkins played the same position. I felt that Hudson was a shooting guard as well to get him in the starting lineup, and we'll talk about that. You have Joe Johnson, another very underrated player for a long time. Had some great years with the Hawks, and we'll talk about him in a minute. Kevin Willis, very good power forward, center, rebounder. Steve Smith, who had some good years. Pete Maravich, who didn't play a whole lot of time there, but he was a very good player for about 4 years with the Hawks before he went to the Jazz. Paul Millsap, we'll talk about. Josh Smith, Doc Rivers, Al Horford, and Jeff Teague, Kyle Korver, and Spud Webb. Now, with this team, I feel that there's a lot of things that need to change. That's just my honest opinion, okay? And we are going to go over those changes here if I can find them. And basically, I would recommend, you don't have to do this, but that's the thrill of this. You can customize your rosters to your liking, but I would delete Spud Webb. I would delete Kyle Korver. I would delete Jeff Teague. I would delete Josh Smith. And I would delete Paul Millsap off my team. And I'm not saying that these guys weren't good players, okay? Because they were. But the names that I'm going to share with you are Hall of Fame players. None of these guys, I don't think, are going to be in the Hall of Fame when it's all said and done. So stay with me, and we will be right back with the roster edits for the Atlanta St. Louis Hawks. All right, so I feel that, you know, there are some changes that need to be, and the biggest one is Mr. Lenny Wilkens. Lenny Wilkens is found on the game under the Oklahoma City all-time team, which is also the Seattle Supersonics. But if you look at his numbers, he played from 1960 to 61, or 60-61 to 67-68 with the St. Louis Hawks and the Atlanta Hawks, which is actually more time than he actually spent with the Seattle Supersonics. So to omit him from the Atlanta Hawks, St. Louis Hawks all-time team is just foolish, and I don't understand why NBA 2K18 overlooked that. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't belong on the all-time Seattle Supersonics, but I think he definitely belongs on the all-time Atlanta Hawks team as the starting point guard. We also talked about Lou Hudson. He would be the starting shooting guard. I changed his position to shooting guard instead of small forward because the small forward is Dominique Wilkins. And you round out your power forward and center with Bob Pettit and Dikembe Mutombo. Now, we talked about Joe Johnson. He was, a great bench guy coming off the bench, backing up that small forward shooting guard spot of Wilkins and Hudson. Now, this next guy is technically a center by trade, but because we already have some centers on there, I made him a power forward, and that is Zelmo Beaty, who was an all-time St. Louis Hawk and Atlanta Hawk, and he is a NBA Hall of Famer. He got in a couple years ago. I believe he went in with the same year that Shaquille O'Neal did, and I feel that he's a better big man fit for this team than Josh Smith or Paul Millsap. Now, I'm not saying that Millsap and Smith aren't great players, but I feel a Hall of Famer like Zelmo Beaty kind of gets the nod over those two guys. So moving on, another center, and now this is why you're seeing why I have him at power forward, that's also necessary to be on the game, I feel, and created, is Walt Bellamy. Walt Bellamy basically finished his career with the Hawks, but he was an exceptional player with the Washington Bullets, or Wizards, whatever you want to call them, before that. So he makes the all-time team on the Bullets, Wizards, and the Hawks. But Bellamy finished up his career with the Hawks and had a very good, 4 or 5 years with the team. So I felt that he is a good backup center to Dikembe Mutombo on this team. We talked about Pete Maravich. I feel that Maravich is a great player, but I don't know if I would put his Atlanta stats ahead of Lou Hudson's Atlanta stats. Maravich is a better player than Lou Hudson for his career, but as an Atlanta Hawk, I don't think he was a better Atlanta Hawk than Lou Hudson, if you get what I'm saying. So he's the backup shooting guard. You have a backup power forward center, another banger type. That's Kevin Willis. Kevin Willis wasn't really a prolific scorer with the Hawks. I mean, he did average 19 a season, 18 a season a few times, as you can see here from his stats. But he was the rebounder of the team. He averaged 15 rebounds a season in 91-92. I mean, that's crazy, 10 and a half. So this is your 7-foot power forward center type, kind of like Zelmo Beaty, but this guy is your instant defender and your rebounder if you need him. Now this other guy that I added as a backup point guard is very often forgotten, and that is University of Texas point guard Slater Martin. Slater Doogie Martin also played for the Boston Celtics, but he was traded to the St. Louis Hawks to help the Hawks win a championship. And Slater Martin is a Hall of Famer. Very small man. I think he was only 5'10", 170. So he's not an imposing figure by any means, but he is an NBA Hall of Famer and a great backup point guard, pass first type of point guard. You're not going to get a whole lot of offense out of Slater, but he's a good guy to dish the ball to your scorers like Dominique Wilkins and Bob Pettit. So I feel that him as the backup point guard over somebody such as Doc Rivers or Spud Webb, he gets the nod. Now this next guy is technically a power forward, but I put him as a small forward because he's kind of an undersized 6'4". But during his day, he played power forward, and that is Cliff Hagan, also another great from the St. Louis Hawks era that was on the championship team, also played for the Boston Celtics. I almost didn't put him on the team, and instead I was thinking of putting on St. Louis University's great Ed MaCauley. However, being that we had Kevin Willis, being that we had Dikembe Mutombo, and being that Walt Bellamy and Zelmo Beaty were on the team, this would be a team full of centers if I were to add another center. So I bumped the camera there, sorry. I felt that having Cliff Hagan as a small forward backup to a backup small forward would be an excellent addition. And if, again, a great scorer during his era, an NBA Hall of Famer, I felt that he gets the nod over somebody like Josh Smith. And finally, I round out the roster with Steve Smith. Steve Smith, I don't think is going to be a Hall of Famer, but he was a very good player. I feel as the 13th player, he's a good defender. He can shoot a three on occasion. And he's also the type of guy that you could try to guard Michael Jordan with, or their best scorer, on their team. Larry Bird, you could probably match him up against, and he would do some great defending for you. So a defensive specialist, more or less. And to round out the list, I left Rivers and Al Horford on the bench as the 14th and 15th player. Again, Horford might get the nod over Kevin Willis, but honestly, I think Kevin Willis, being the dominating force that he was, gets the nod over Horford, even though Horford was a very good player for the Hawks for a long time. So, the coach on this team is Richie Guerin, and I don't know why this game does that kind of close-up on people, but Richie Guerin, we'll talk about in this screen so you can see him a little better, was a player for the Hawks, but he also became a coach for the Hawks. And he also is an NBA Hall of Famer. I felt that his numbers were probably the strongest throughout the history of the St. Louis and Atlanta Hawks as an overall coach. They have had other great coaches, but I feel that Richie Guerin would probably be the best fit for this team because he was a player and he was also a coach, and I feel that that would be a good fit for this team. And also added Larry Drew as the assistant coach, who also was the head coach for this team for a long time. So, in closing, I feel I really enjoy playing with this team because I really like Dominique Wilkins. I love the way he can dunk on this game. He is a very good ball player. I feel that the game didn't give him justice in his shooting ability. I feel that he's a little better shooter than NBA 2K18 credits him for. But as I said, check out some links on Dominique Wilkins. He was like one of the most unstoppable forces in the NBA for a few years. So I hope you liked the video. I hope you agree with my picks. That's the fun of this. We always can debate on what we don't like and what we do like. So stay tuned for future episodes, and I look forward to your comments below.